The briefing room aboard the Galactic Coalition cruiser Zenith's Edge hummed with the quiet energy of advanced alien technology. Commander Jake Morrison sat at the far end of the metal table and watched as holographic displays showed the hostile planet below. Kithara Prime spun slowly in the projected image, and its surface looked like a nightmare of endless storms and toxic clouds. Captain Vexstar stood at the head of the table, and his crystalline body caught the light from the displays. His people, the Zelfani, had evolved on a world of living crystals, and their natural armor could deflect most energy weapons. He gestured toward the planet with one of his 4 arms, and his voice carried the musical tone typical of his species. "The mission is simple enough," he said, and his words rang like wind chimes in the recycled air. "We need to retrieve quantum crystals from the research vessel that crashed 3 days ago. The storm systems make this complicated but not impossible for properly equipped teams." Lieutenant Chitrix clicked his mandibles together in what passed for agreement among his insect people. The Kavari officer stood nearly 7 feet tall, and his exoskeleton gleamed with bioadaptive plating that could change its molecular structure in seconds. His compound eyes focused on the human at the table, and Morrison could hear the barely contained amusement in his chittering voice. "What concerns me is the human equipment," he said, and gestured toward Morrison with one of his 6 arms. "I have reviewed the specifications, and they appear to be made of simple metals and ceramics. Surely such primitive materials cannot withstand the acid concentrations we will encounter." Officer Merlin shifted in her specialized chair, and the Aquarian's blue-green skin rippled with concern. Her people came from the deep oceans of their homeworld and had developed technology that worked with water rather than against it. Her hydro armor could repair itself instantly and adapt to any liquid. "Environmenti mean no disrespect to our human colleagues," she said, and her voice carried the flowing quality of her aquatic heritage. "But the atmospheric readings from Kithara Prime show acid levels that would dissolve most standard materials in minutes. Perhaps Commander Morrison should remain aboard the ship for this operation." Morrison had been listening to this conversation for 20 minutes, and he kept his expression neutral as the alien officers discussed his equipment like he was not in the room. He had seen this before on other joint operations, and the pattern was always the same. The aliens would examine human technology and declare it inadequate, then suggest humans stay behind for their own safety. The truth was more complicated than they understood, but Morrison had learned not to argue. Human diplomatic protocols required him to work with alien partners, and making them feel superior often made missions run smoother. He would do his job regardless of what they thought about his gear. Captain Vexstar activated another holographic display, and this one showed detailed scans of the planet's surface conditions. The numbers were impressive even by human standards. Atmospheric acid concentration measured at levels that could eat through starship hulls, and electromagnetic storms raged across entire continents. The temperature readings showed extremes that would kill most life forms in seconds. "These conditions require the most advanced protection available," Vexstar continued, and he gestured toward his own quantum phase armor. The suit shimmered with energy fields that could shift matter between different states of existence. "My gear can phase through solid matter while maintaining complete environmental sealing. The acid cannot touch what technically does not exist." In the same dimensional Specichitrix stood and activated his biosuit's demonstration mode. The armor rippled and changed color as it adapted to simulated hostile conditions. "Watch as my equipment evolves in real time," he said with obvious pride. "The bioadaptive plating can restructure its molecular bonds to resist any chemical threat. It learns from exposure and becomes stronger with each challenge." Marin activated her own suit's display, and the hydro armor flowed like liquid metal across her body. "My people have perfected the art of working with hostile liquids," she explained, as the armor demonstrated its self-repair functions. Any breach seals instantly, and the suit can process most chemicals into harmless components. "The acid storms of Kithara Prime are no different from the toxic deep currents of my homeworld." Morrison watched these demonstrations with professional interest and made notes on his datapad. The alien technology was impressive and represented centuries of specialized evolution and development. Each species had created protection systems that reflected their unique biology and planetary conditions. The problem was that none of them understood what human equipment was actually designed to handle. Vexter turned toward Morrison, and his crystalline features showed what might have been concern. Commander Morrison, I appreciate your enthusiasm for this mission, but I must express serious doubts about your equipment's capabilities. The readings from Cathara Prime exceed the operational parameters of most known material. Morrison looked up from his notes and kept his voice calm and professional. I understand your concerns, Captain, but my equipment has been tested in similar conditions. I would like to request assignment to the primary recovery team. The silence that followed was broken only by Chikrix's chittering laughter. The insectoid officer's compound eyes glittered with amusement as he looked at his colleagues. Did the human just volunteer to walk into conditions that would dissolve him in minutes even? Merlin's diplomatic nature could not hide her shock at the request. Commander Morrison, she said gently, perhaps you do not fully understand the severity of the environmental hazards we will face. The acid concentrations alone would compromise any standard protection system. Vexter studied Morrison for a long moment, and his crystalline features reflected the light from the holographic displays. Human, I have worked with your species before, and I know you have courage that often exceeds wisdom. But courage cannot protect you from atmospheric acid that registers at concentrations we use for industrial metal processing. Morrison stood and walked to the display showing his equipment specifications. The readout showed standard Earth military armor with ceramic composite plating and basic environmental sealing. Compared to the alien gear, it looked almost primitive with its simple construction and straightforward design. I appreciate your concern, he said, and turned back to face the alien officers. But I have confidence in my equipment and training. If possible, I would like to be assigned to ground operations rather than support duties. The request seemed to surprise all three alien officers, and they exchanged glances that clearly communicated their shared opinion of human judgment. Vextar's voice carried a note of finality when he responded very well. Commander Morrison, you may join the ground team, but you will be assigned to perimeter security, well away from the primary storm zones. I will not have a diplomatic incident because human equipment failed in predictable ways. Morrison nodded his acceptance and returned to his seat. The briefing continued with tactical discussions and mission timelines, but he could feel the alien officers watching him with expressions that mixed pity with disbelief. They had made their decision about human capabilities based on what they could see and understand. What they could not see was that human equipment was not designed to impress anyone or demonstrate advanced technology. It was designed to keep humans alive on Earth, and that was a very different requirement than most species could imagine. The armory bay of the Zenith's Edge buzzed with activity as teams prepared for the mission to Cathara Prime. Commander Jake Morrison stood at his assigned equipment station and methodically checked each piece of his gear. His movements were precise and practiced as he ran diagnostics on systems that looked unremarkable compared to the advanced alien technology surrounding him. At the station next to his Lieutenant Chitrix was conducting his own preparations, and the difference was striking. The Kavari officer's bioadaptive arm writhed and shifted as it calibrated itself to handle the expected environmental conditions. The living metal surface rippled with colors that changed from deep black to brilliant silver as internal systems tested their molecular restructuring capabilities. Morrison watched the display with professional interest while running his own equipment checks. His armor showed green status lights across all systems, but the technology appeared unchanged from what any Earth soldier might wear. The ceramic composite plates were clean and undamaged, and the environmental sealing systems registered full operational capacity. A group of Zelthani technicians passed by his station, and their crystalline forms reflected the overhead lighting as they carried specialized equipment. Morrison could hear their musical voices discussing the mission parameters, and their tone carried the same mixture of concern and amusement he had heard in the briefing room. The human's equipment is so primitive, one of them chimed to his companion. Look at those simple ceramic plates and basic metal joints. How can such crude materials protect anything in a real hostile environment? His companion's voice carried sympathetic harmonics as he replied. Their species is young and has not had time to develop proper technology. Perhaps we should suggest they remain aboard the ship where they will be safe. Morrison continued his preparations without acknowledging the conversation. He had heard similar discussions on every joint operation and had learned that arguing with alien assumptions usually made situations worse. Human diplomatic protocols emphasize cooperation and avoiding unnecessary conflicts over technical specifications. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes approached his station, carrying a datapad filled with the latest sensor readings from Kithara Prime. She was one of the few other humans aboard the Coalition cruiser and served as communications officer for joint operations. Her expression showed the same concerns Morrison had seen from the alien officers. Jake, she said quietly and glanced around to make sure they were not overheard. I have been reviewing the atmospheric data from the target zone, and the readings are worse than the initial report suggested. The acid concentrations are measuring at levels that would eat through starship hull plating in minutes. Morrison looked up from his equipment check and kept his voice calm. What are the specific numbers? Lisa. She activated her datapad and showed him the scrolling chemical analysis. The atmospheric acid content is registering at 12.7 on the galactic hazard scale, she said, and her voice carried growing concern. Most Coalition equipment is rated to handle conditions up to level 8, and even the most advanced alien gear has never been tested. Beyond level 10, Morrison studied the numbers and made mental calculations based on his training and experience. The readings were impressive by any standard and represented environmental conditions that would kill most life forms almost instantly. The electromagnetic interference alone would disable most electronic systems, and the pressure variations would crush anything not specifically designed to handle extreme conditions. The problem was that the readings reminded him of a typical spring storm. Back home on Earth, what does the alien command think about these numbers? He asked while continuing his equipment preparations. Hayes checked her notes and looked increasingly worried. Captain Vextar is concerned about the safety margins for his quantum phase armor, and Lieutenant Chitrix has requested additional bio-adaptive modifications for his suit. Officer Merlin thinks the conditions might exceed even her hydro armor's adaptive capabilities. Morrison nodded and returned to his preparations. The alien officers were reacting exactly as he would expect from beings whose technology had been developed for environments much more forgiving than Earth. Their advanced gear represented centuries of evolution and refinement, but it was designed for conditions that humans would consider mild across the armory bay. Captain Vextar was conducting his own equipment tests, and the quantum phase armor was creating an impressive display of shifting energy fields. The suit could phase through solid matter while maintaining environmental protection and represented some of the most advanced technology in known space. Other alien officers gathered to watch as the demonstration showed the armor's ability to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Morrison's equipment check was less spectacular but equally thorough. His heads-up display activated and showed system status across all components. The atmospheric processors were functioning normally, and the chemical filters showed full capacity. The ceramic composite armor plates were intact and showed no signs of stress or fatigue. A group of Aquarian technicians approached Morrison's station, and their blue-green skin rippled with curiosity. The lead technician's voice carried the flowing quality typical of her species as she addressed him directly. Commander Morrison, she said politely, we have been reviewing the specifications of your equipment, and we are concerned about its ability to handle the environmental conditions on Kithara Prime. Would you accept assistance in upgrading your protection systems? Morrison looked up from his preparations and appreciated the genuine concern in her offer. Thank you for the suggestion, but my equipment meets all operational requirements for this mission. The technician's skin rippled with patterns that indicated confusion and worry. But Commander, the acid concentrations alone will compromise any standard materials within minutes of exposure. Your ceramic plating cannot possibly withstand such conditions. Morrison finished his system checks and began securing his gear for transport. I understand your concerns, but I have confidence in my equipment's capabilities. Human technology may appear simple, but it is designed to handle challenging conditions. The technician exchanged glances with her colleagues, and their expressions showed the same mixture of pity and disbelief Morrison had seen throughout the ship. They clearly believed he was either ignorant of the dangers or suffering from some form of suicidal overconfidence. Truth was more complex than they could understand without knowing the conditions that had shaped human technology. Earth was not a kind planet and had never been forgiving to the species that evolved on its surface. The atmospheric conditions that humans considered normal would register as extremely hazardous on the galactic hazard scale, and the weather patterns that Earth children learned to navigate would qualify as natural disasters on most alien worlds. Human equipment was not designed to impress other species or demonstrate advanced technology. It was designed to keep humans alive in an environment that actively tried to kill them every single day. Morrison secured the last of his gear and checked the mission timeline on his datapad. The deployment was scheduled to begin in 6 hours, and would take them through atmospheric conditions that the alien officers considered extremely dangerous. He had read their technical specifications and understood their concerns about equipment failure and environmental hazards. What they could not understand was that the conditions on Kithara Prime were actually milder than a typical Earth thunderstorm. The planet's acid rain measured at concentrations that were lower than Earth's industrial precipitation, and the atmospheric pressure variations were less extreme than the weather systems that crossed Earth's oceans every day. The electromagnetic interference was significant but well within the parameters that human equipment handled routinely. Morrison had grown up in the American Midwest, where tornado seasons produced conditions that would terrify most alien species, and had served in military operations that took him through environmental hazards that exceeded anything in the Coalition databases. His equipment had been tested in Death Valley, where surface temperatures could kill most life forms, and in the deep ocean trenches, where pressure levels would crush most known materials. It had functioned normally during Arctic operations, where the cold would freeze most alien biology solid, and in tropical storms where the wind speeds exceeded most spacecraft engines. The alien officers saw primitive technology because they were comparing human gear to their own specialized adaptations. What they could not see was that human equipment was designed for a world where the baseline environmental conditions were already more hostile than their worst-case scenarios. Morrison finished his preparations and walked toward the deployment bay, where the alien teams were gathering for final mission briefings. He could hear their voices discussing contingency plans and emergency procedures for equipment failure. They were preparing for conditions they considered extremely dangerous, while he was preparing for what amounted to a pleasant day outdoors by Earth standards. The dropships launched from the zenith's edge in perfect formation and descended toward the hostile surface of Kithara Prime. Commander Jake Morrison watched through his pod's viewport as the planet grew larger and more menacing with each passing minute. The atmospheric storms that raged across the continents looked like massive hurricanes of acid and lightning that never stopped. Moving Captain Vextar's voice crackled through the communication system as the lead ship approached the drop zone. All teams prepare for deployment and remember that environmental conditions exceed normal operational parameters. Emergency extraction protocols are active, and any equipment failures should be reported immediately. Morrison checked his gear one final time as his pod separated from the main formation. His navigation systems showed that atmospheric interference had pushed him slightly off course, and he would land approximately half a kilometer from the primary drop zone. The deviation was minor, but it would place him closer to an approaching storm front that was not supposed to reach the area for another hour. The landing was rough, but within acceptable parameters, and Morrison felt his pod impact the planet's surface with a metallic clang that echoed through his environmental suit. The external sensors immediately began registering atmospheric conditions, and the readings were exactly what he had expected based on the pre-mission briefings. Outside his pod, the landscape of Kithara Prime stretched in all directions like something from a nightmare. The ground was covered with crystalline formations that had been carved by centuries of acid rain, and the sky showed an angry mixture of green and yellow clouds that promised nothing but death to any unprotected life form. Morrison activated his communication system and reported his position to the mission command. This is Morrison reporting successful landing at coordinates 77 Alpha and beginning approach to primary objective. All systems showing green status. The response came from Lieutenant Chitrix, whose bioadaptive armor was already analyzing the atmospheric conditions around the main drop zone. Morrison, be advised that sensor readings in your sector are showing elevated acid concentrations and the approaching storm front appears to be moving faster than predicted. Morrison checked his external sensors and confirmed the readings. The acid levels in his immediate area were higher than the mission parameters had suggested, but still well within the operating range of his equipment. He began moving toward the crash site, and his boots crunched on the crystalline ground that had been shaped by generations of Environmental Extremes. Officer Merlin S. Voice joined the communication network as her team established their perimeter around the main objective. Environmental conditions here are challenging but manageable with proper equipment, and we are beginning our approach to the crashed research vessel. Morrison, your sector readings are showing dangerous escalation. Morrison continued his steady progress toward the target location, and his movement sensors tracked the approaching storm with growing intensity. The atmospheric disturbance was definitely arriving ahead of schedule, but his equipment was handling the increasing acid concentrations without any problems. Captain Vextar's voice cut through the other communications with obvious concern. Morrison, the storm front in your sector is showing acid concentrations that will exceed safe operational limits within minutes. You need to fall back to a secure position immediately. Morrison paused to check his equipment status, and every system showed normal operation despite the increasingly hostile conditions around him. The external sensors were registering acid levels that should have triggered emergency protocols, but his armor was functioning exactly as designed. A negative command. Morrison replied calmly. All systems remain operational, and I'm continuing toward the objective. Environmental sealing is holding, and no equipment degradation detected. The silence that followed his report was filled with what Morrison could only interpret as shocked disbelief from the alien officers. His external cameras were transmitting real-time footage of his progress through conditions that should have dissolved most known materials within minutes. Lieutenant Chitrix's voice carried a note of barely controlled panic as he monitored Morrison's progress. Morrison, the acid concentration in your sector is measuring at 15.3 on the galactic hazard scale and climbing rapidly. No known protection system can handle those levels. Morrison continued walking through the increasingly violent atmospheric conditions, and his boots splashed through puddles of liquid that would have eaten through starship hulls. The storm front was definitely intensifying, but his equipment was responding exactly as it had been designed to respond. I copy your concerns, Morrison said into his communication system. But my readings show all systems within normal operating parameters, and I am maintaining course toward the objective. The alien teams had stopped their own operations to monitor Morrison's progress through their sensor networks, and the readings they were receiving defied everything they understood about materials science and environmental protection. Their own advanced equipment was struggling with residual acid exposure at the storm's outer edges, while the human was walking calmly through concentrations that should have killed him instantly. Captain Vextar's quantum phase armor began showing stress indicators as it struggled to maintain dimensional cohesion against the increasing environmental hostility. His voice carried a mixture of awe and terror as he watched Morrison's progress on the tactical displays. Morrison, this is impossible, he said, and his crystalline voice carried harmonics of complete bewilderment. The conditions in your sector would destroy our most advanced protection systems in seconds. How is your equipment still functioning? Morrison checked his navigation display and estimated his arrival time at the crash site. His external sensors continued to register environmental conditions that were impressive by any standard, but his armor was handling everything exactly as expected. Perhaps there is a sensor malfunction, Morrison suggested diplomatically. My equipment is functioning normally, and I'm approaching the target location now. The approaching storm front had fully engulfed Morrison's position and turned the already hostile environment into something that resembled the surface of an alien hell. Acid rain fell in sheets that dissolved everything they touched, and electromagnetic lightning crackled through the toxic atmosphere with enough energy to power small cities through. If all Morrison walked steadily toward his objective, and his movements appeared completely unimpeded by conditions that would have reduced the most advanced alien technology to molecular components. His external cameras continued transmitting clear images of his progress and showed him moving through the storm like it was nothing more than a mild spring shower. Officer Merlin S. Hydro Armor activated emergency protocols as trace amounts of the storm's edge reached her position and threatened to overwhelm her adaptive systems. Her voice carried disbelief as she watched Morrison's steady progress through conditions that would kill her in seconds. Commander Morrison, she said with growing amazement, you are walking through environmental conditions that exceed the most extreme RATINGS in our databases. How is this possible? Morrison reached the edge of the crash site and could see the twisted remains of the research vessel through the acid storm. The quantum crystals they needed were visible through the wreckage and appeared to be intact despite the hostile conditions. Mission objective in sight, Morrison reported calmly. Beginning extraction procedures. Now the alien officers, listening to his calm professional voice, could only watch in stunned silence as the human began his work in the heart of a storm that represented their worst nightmares of environmental hostility. Their advanced technology had been pushed to its limits by the outer edges of the same conditions that Morrison was treating like routine weather. What they could not understand was that for a species that had evolved on Earth, the acid storms of Kithara Prime were actually quite pleasant compared to home. The acid storm raged around Commander Jake Morrison with the fury of a planetary nightmare, but his steady voice continued reporting through the communication system as if he were taking a casual walk through a park. The external sensors on his armor registered conditions that should have dissolved any known material within seconds, yet Morrison moved through the maelstrom with calm, professional efficiency. Visibility near zero, Morrison reported as he approached the twisted wreckage of the research vessel. But navigation systems are functioning normally, and I have visual contact with the primary objective. The quantum crystal matrix appears to be intact aboard the Zenith's Edge. The alien officers clustered around monitoring stations and watched readouts that defied everything they understood about physics and materials science. Captain Vexstar's crystalline features reflected the glow from multiple displays as he studied sensor data that showed Morrison walking through acid concentrations that would liquefy most known substances. This cannot be accurate, Vexstar said to the technicians operating the monitoring equipment. Run full diagnostics on all sensor arrays and confirm these readings through secondary systems. The Zelthani technicians worked frantically at their controls, and their musical voices carried notes of confusion and growing panic. All sensors show consistent readings, Captain, and the human's external cameras are transmitting clear images from inside the storm. The data appears to be accurate. Lieutenant Chitrix stood nearby, and his bioadaptive armor showed stress fractures along its surface from exposure to residual acid that had reached the perimeter of the storm. His compound eyes focused on displays showing Morrison's vital signs and equipment status with growing disbelief. The human's armor is showing no degradation whatsoever, Chitrix said, and his mandibles clicked with nervous energy. My own equipment is failing from trace exposure? While he walks through concentrations that would dissolve our ship's hull plating, Officer Merlin S. Hydro Armor had activated full emergency protocols and was struggling to maintain integrity against acid levels that barely registered as significant compared to Morrison's position. Her voice carried the flowing tones of amazement mixed with terror as she monitored the impossible situation. I have never seen environmental readings like these, she said to her colleagues. The electromagnetic interference alone should have disabled his communication systems and life support. Yet he continues working as if conditions were completely normal. Morrison had reached the crash site and was methodically extracting the quantum crystals from their protective housing within the wreckage. His movements were precise and unhurried despite the apocalyptic conditions surrounding him, and his external cameras transmitted clear images of his work. Crystal matrix secure, Morrison reported as he carefully placed the first sample into his collection container. Estimated time to complete extraction is 12 minutes. All systems continue to show green status. The alien teams watching from their positions at the storm's edge could barely comprehend what they were witnessing. Their most advanced technology was being pushed beyond safe operating limits by environmental conditions that were mild compared to what Morrison was experiencing in the heart of the storm. Captain Vextar's quantum phase armor began flickering as it struggled to maintain dimensional cohesion against the increasing acid concentration. The technology that could phase through solid matter was being defeated by atmospheric conditions that Morrison's apparently primitive gear was handling without difficulty. Morrison, Vextar said, and his voice carried harmonics of desperate confusion. Please explain how your equipment is maintaining integrity in those conditions. Our sensors show acid concentrations that would destroy quantum phase technology in seconds. Morrison continued his extraction work, and his voice remained calm and professional as he responded. I am not certain, Captain, but all systems are functioning within normal parameters. Perhaps the storm is not as severe as the sensors indicate. The suggestion that their advanced monitoring equipment might be malfunctioning was less believable than the alternative that human technology somehow exceeded galactic understanding. But the alien officers had no other explanation for what they were witnessing. Lieutenant Chitrix's biosuit began showing critical system warnings as its adaptive capabilities reached their limits, trying to handle environmental conditions that were insignificant compared to Morrison's position. The living armor that could evolve in real time was being overwhelmed by trace amounts of the same chemicals that Morrison was walking through without concern. How is this possible? Chitrix muttered to himself as he watched Morrison calmly work in conditions that would kill every member of his species instantly. The human's armor appears to be constructed from basic materials, yet it outperforms our most advanced protection systems. Officer Merlin's equipment was showing similar stress indicators, and her hydro armor's self-repair functions were working at maximum capacity to handle exposure levels that were minimal compared to what Morrison was experiencing. Her scientific mind struggled to process data that contradicted fundamental principles of materials science. The readings show that Commander Morrison is operating in environmental conditions that exceed our most extreme theoretical projections, she said to the monitoring team. Yet his equipment shows no signs of degradation or system failure. Morrison had completed extraction of the second quantum crystal and was securing it in his collection system when the storm around him intensified even further. Acid rain that had been falling in steady sheets became a torrential downpour of corrosive death, and electromagnetic lightning began striking the ground with increasing frequency. Storm intensity increasing, Morrison reported matter-of-factly. But extraction proceeding normally and estimated completion time remains unchanged. The alien officers could only watch in stunned amazement as conditions that would represent the end of the world on their homeworlds became slightly more inconvenient, whether for the human walking through them. Their displays showed environmental readings that should have been physically impossible for any organic being to survive. Captain Vextar ordered his technical staff to begin emergency preparations for Morrison's extraction, assuming that human equipment failure was inevitable despite all evidence to the contrary. The Zalthani officer could not accept that primitive human technology could outperform quantum phase armor in extreme conditions. Prepare emergency extraction protocols, Vextar ordered his staff. When the human's equipment fails, we will have seconds to retrieve him before total system collapse. But Morrison's equipment showed no signs of impending failure, and his steady progress through the extraction process continued without interruption. He worked methodically through each step of the crystal recovery procedure while surrounded by conditions that would have reduced the alien observers to their component atoms. Third crystal secured, Morrison reported as he completed the delicate removal process. Beginning final extraction phase. Now the storm around him had reached levels that defied measurement on any known scale, and the acid concentrations were beyond anything in the Galactic Coalition's environmental databases. Yet Morrison continued working with the same calm efficiency he had shown since landing on the planet. The alien officers watching his progress had moved beyond amazement into something approaching existential terror as they realized that their understanding of materials science and environmental protection might be fundamentally flawed? If human technology could handle conditions that destroyed their most advanced equipment, then what did that say about their own technological development? Morrison completed the final extraction and secured all quantum crystals in his collection. System. The mission objective had been accomplished in conditions that should have been impossible to survive, and his equipment continued to function exactly as design mission accomplished, Morrison reported calmly. All crystals secured and beginning return journey to extraction point. As he turned to leave the crash site, the alien officers prepared themselves to witness the most impossible sight yet. Morrison was about to walk back through the acid storm that had nearly destroyed their equipment from a distance, and he was going to do it as calmly as he had walked into it. Commander Jake Morrison emerged from the acid storm of Kithara Prime like a figure stepping out of a mild rain shower. His armor showed no signs of damage, and his movements remained steady and unhurried as he approached the extraction point where the alien teams waited in stunned silence. The quantum crystals were secure in his collection system, and his equipment readings showed perfect operational status. The contrast between Morrison's condition and that of the alien officers was striking and impossible to ignore. Captain Vextar's quantum phase armor flickered with instability from minimal exposure to the storm's outer edges, while Morrison's apparently primitive gear looked exactly as it had when the mission began. Captain Morrison reported as he reached the perimeter where the alien teams had established their position. Mission objectives completed successfully and all crystal samples secured. Ready for extraction, Captain Vextar's voice carried harmonics of bewilderment and growing awe as he studied the readings from Morrison's equipment. Commander Morrison, please report your current equipment status and any system degradation experienced during the operation. Morrison ran a quick diagnostic check and reviewed his suit's performance data. All systems nominal, Captain, with no degradation detected. Armor integrity remains at 100% and all environmental seals are functioning within normal parameters. The silence that followed this report was broken only by the distant rumble of the acid storm and the quiet hum of alien technology struggling to process impossible data. Lieutenant Chitrix's bio-adaptive armor was showing critical stress fractures, while Officer Merlin's hydrosuit had activated emergency protocols that were barely keeping her systems functional. The extraction shuttle arrived on schedule, and Morrison boarded along with the alien teams, who continued to stare at him with expressions that mixed respect with something approaching fear. During the flight back to the Zenith's edge, the alien officers spoke in hushed tones about equipment readings that defied explanation. Once aboard the Coalition cruiser, Morrison was immediately escorted to the medical bay for standard post-mission evaluation. The alien medical staff ran comprehensive scans of his physiology and equipment, while Captain Vextar and his officers observed the process with growing confusion. Dr. Harrison Cole, the human mission specialist, arrived to oversee the evaluation, and his presence drew immediate attention from the alien officers. Cole was one of Earth's leading experts on environmental protection technology and had been assigned to the Coalition to facilitate human integration into galactic operations. The medical scans showed that Morrison was in perfect health with no signs of exposure to hazardous chemicals or environmental stress. His equipment analysis revealed armor that appeared completely unchanged by its exposure to conditions that had nearly destroyed advanced alien technology. Captain Vextar approached Dr. Cole with obvious urgency, and his crystalline features reflected his desperate need for answers. Dr. Cole, I must understand how human equipment can survive conditions that would destroy our most advanced protection systems. The readings we observed today challenge everything we know about materials science. Dr. Cole studied the data from Morrison's mission and nodded thoughtfully as he reviewed environmental readings that showed conditions beyond anything in the galactic databases. He had been expecting this conversation since humans first joined Coalition operations and knew that the truth would fundamentally change how aliens viewed human technology. The explanation is simpler than you might expect, Dr. Cole said to the assembled alien officers. Human environmental protection is not advanced because It does not need to be advanced. Our equipment is designed to handle routine conditions on Earth. Lieutenant Chitrix's mandibles clicked with confusion as he processed this statement. But Doctor, the conditions on Kithara Prime exceeded the most extreme ratings in our databases. How can your routine equipment handle what our advanced technology cannot? Dr. Cole activated a holographic display showing comparative environmental data from various worlds, and the numbers told a story that none of the alien officers were prepared to hear. Earth's baseline atmospheric conditions registered as extremely hazardous on the galactic environmental scale. Your homeworlds, Dr. Cole explained, are what humans would consider paradise planets with stable climates and gentle environmental conditions. Earth is classified as a death world by every species that has studied it. The display showed atmospheric analysis from Earth, and the readings were sobering. Ocean acidity levels that exceeded anything found on most alien worlds, and atmospheric chemistry that would poison the majority of known species. Weather patterns that regularly produced conditions classified as natural disasters by galactic standards. Captain Vexstar studied the data, and his voice carried notes of growing understanding mixed with horror. These readings suggest that Earth's normal weather exceeds the emergency protocols of most coalition worlds. Dr. Cole nodded and continued his explanation. A typical Earth thunderstorm produces acid rain concentrations higher than what Commander Morrison experienced today, and our atmospheric pressure variations during normal weather changes would crush most alien physiology. Officer Merlin's skin rippled with patterns that indicated deep shock as she processed the implications. You are saying that human basic equipment is designed to handle conditions that would kill most of us instantly? Exactly, Dr. Cole confirmed. Earth's oceans are more corrosive than the acid storm on Kithara Prime, and our atmospheric conditions contain chemical combinations that would be classified as weapons on most worlds. The alien officers looked at Morrison with new understanding and realized that what they had interpreted as primitive technology was actually equipment designed for survival in conditions that exceeded their worst nightmares. Human gear was not basic because humans lacked advanced technology, but because they did not need advanced technology to handle environments that would destroy most galactic civilizations. Morrison, who had been quietly cleaning his completely undamaged armor, looked up at the assembled officers and decided to add some context to Dr. Cole's explanation. Earth did not make us tough because we are special, he said calmly. Earth made us tough because anything that was not tough enough did not survive long enough to evolve. The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything the aliens thought they knew about planetary development and species evolution. Their homeworlds had nurtured them and provided stable environments that allowed for gradual technological advancement. Earth had tried to kill humanity every single day for millions of years, and the species that survived was the one that learned to treat apocalyptic conditions as normal weather. Captain Vexstar's voice carried new respect when he spoke again. Commander Morrison, I formally request detailed specifications for human environmental protection systems and a complete technical review of Earth military equipment. Morrison nodded his agreement but added a warning that the alien officers needed to understand. I should mention, Captain, that what you observed today was our standard equipment designed for routine operations. We have specialized gear for conditions we consider actually dangerous. The implications of this statement settled over the alien officers like a heavy weight as they realized that human routine equipment had outperformed their most advanced technology, and humans had even more capable systems for situations they considered truly hazardous. Lieutenant Chitrix spoke for all of them when he said quietly, I think we need to reconsider our understanding of what primitive means. Dr. Cole smiled and prepared to begin what would be the first of many long conversations about the realities of human technology and the world that had forged it. The Galactic Coalition was about to learn that their newest members brought capabilities that were beyond their current understanding. Morrison finished securing his gear and prepared for the next mission, while alien officers watched with newfound respect mixed with just enough fear to keep things interesting.